Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
It is November 1st, and typically at this point in hurricane season, with just 1 month left, we would be looking at a map that doesn't have a lot of activity on it. Unfortunately, that is not the case. It is November 1st. We have just 1 month left of hurricane season, and we are still tracking the possibility of development in the Caribbean. National Hurricane Center highlighting this tropical wave, calling it Invest 97L. And it has a medium chance of developing as it continues to move west through the Caribbean. So that is what we are focusing on today on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, meteorologist Amanda Hawley in the WFLA Now Stream Center. Also joined by WFLA meteorologist Rebecca Berry and our featured meteorologist today from WPHL, Monica Cryan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Happy to be here the day after Halloween.
Yeah, typically a quiet time for us, at least quieting down, right? And it's a lot quieter than it's been. But for us to still be tracking the possibility of development in the tropics at this point is pretty wild, but I guess not unheard of at this point after the season that we've had. Monica, we've talked a lot about this season and how active it has been with El Nino. Just starting off right now, what are your thoughts on hurricane season so far? We'll get to the tracking of Invest 97L here in just a few minutes. Just want to hear your initial thoughts on this season.
Yeah, I mean, this season definitely got active, but not necessarily with like landfalls. You know what I mean? So we had a lot of activity, and a lot of it just stayed over the open ocean or, just some of those islands. And so I think a lot of people on the land are thinking, okay, this was a quiet maybe season. Yes, we had some of our bad ones, but compared to other hurricane seasons where it was kind of a bombardment after bombardment of landfalling hurricanes, this might be counted by some who don't realize as a kind of quieter season. But you'd be surprised to know that we're already through Tammy, and we only have two names left in the season.
Yeah, I mean, above average right now, and we still have a month left to go. So completely agree with you. We've had a couple of landfalling storms for sure. Most of the activity, though, luckily for us, has been out over the open ocean, and that, we try not to talk about too much. We keep it out there, and hopefully this one will go down for most as an uneventful season. Of course, we had Idalia impact us here in the Tampa Bay area. The Big Bend of Florida brought significant storm surge. The Carolinas have been impacted. The Northeast was impacted by a storm. But yes, luckily, Invest 97L, though, not going to impact the United States at this point, which is nice.
Right. And I mean, that's pretty typical for, these November storms. Now that the waters has cooled, it really isn't going to help these hurricanes grow. So these hurricanes want to stay south where the water's still warm. So that's why it's kind of nice just to keep it on down south.
And we did see a lot of rampant social media posts in relation to this system because one or two model runs would show some really wild tracks. So I just want to remind anyone watching that this is interactive. You can ask us a question or make a comment because there has been a lot of confusion just based on some really irresponsible social media posts that went viral. But you do have to use the hashtag so that we can see your comment or your question. And so you have 3 hashtags you can use. You can use hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey Ramanda. We call ourselves Team Ramanda. It's actually hashtag Hey Amanda, or hashtag
Amanda will work as well.
We don't fight the Team Amanda anymore. And we also have hashtag Hey Monica. You can see those hashtags on your screen. But if you start your question with either of those 3 or 4 hashtags, then we'll be able to see your comment. We'll be able to pull it on the screen. And we'll be able to answer it because it really gets scary when you see some of those social media posts without any context.
Yeah, so let's get into Invest 97L and what we're looking at here over the next couple of days, because this general area over the past week or so has been really favorable for development. We have light winds, we have warm waters, plenty of available ocean energy for development. But that's really it in that area. Anywhere farther to the north, we're looking at a much more hostile environment. So this is Invest 97L. It has a 50% chance of developing over the next 7 days. It's moving pretty quickly through the Caribbean, west through the Caribbean, and will continue to do so. Those forecast models in good agreement at this point. But yes, Rebecca, like you said, some of our longer range forecast models were trying to figure out what this system was going to do over the past week or so. And some of the longer range forecast models did bring it off to the north every other run or so, and those were posted to social media. But the forecast models at this point in general agreement that it is going to continue off to the west. Unfortunately, though, where it's moving at this point, there is an extreme amount of available ocean energy. We're talking about the water temperatures here and how deep the warm waters go. So there's available energy for this system to pick up on and use that energy to actually develop here over the next couple of days. Some of the warmest waters there in the world at this point. We're also looking at the wind shear now. It's going to be favorable in terms of lower winds in the Caribbean. But look at that. In the Gulf of Mexico, the farther north, if this system were to have a window to come to the north, it would run into these really strong upper level winds, which would basically rip this storm apart. So even if it were to move off to the north, we wouldn't be looking at a strong system, maybe a rainmaker. But either way, even if this does or does not develop down south, because the National Hurricane Center has actually lowered the chance of development over the past couple of days, it would likely just bring a lot of rain to this area in the Caribbean. And I want to go back to this graphic. It kind of went through really quickly. If you remember back in 2020, this is the same area that Eta and Iota just a few weeks later hit. Now, these storms were much stronger, but they did strengthen extremely quickly. So it is possible for us to have very strong storms, Category 4, Category 5 storms in November. Again, this was back in 2020. Eta and Iota, just a few weeks apart from each other, moved on shore in the same place. And this is going to be the same location that at least this tropical wave is going to move on shore. Now, if you remember, Eta here in Florida, it ended up making its way off to the north and impacting us here in the Tampa Bay area. It brought a lot of storm surge, kind of like what Idalia did just a couple of months ago for us. But this was Eta again in November, just a weaker storm. So it is possible for us to get storms here in Florida in November. Here's a look at some of the tropical systems, the November tropical systems that have impacted the state. Most of them are weak. So that is some good news. If we see a storm this time of year, as Monica was just saying, they're typically on the weaker side because we have some cooler water temperatures. But nonetheless, guys, we have 1 month left to go of the official season. It has been an active season so far, but certainly a time for us not to let our guard down, especially, Monica, with this strange kind of season where we've seen a lot of activity. We've seen, activity out in the Atlantic. We've seen some activity close to home. Either way, 1 month left to go.
1 month left to go. And it's always, so many people surprised when you hit November and they're saying, okay, hurricanes, we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's like, well, actually, this is a long-lived season.
Yeah.
And so yes, we've got a little more to go. Obviously, when you look at the frequency, it shows that it just goes down as you head through the month of November. It's very infrequent, but it's not out of the possibility.
Yeah, and this is, the general area where we're seeing this possible development. This is where we look in November. Typically, the storms do kind of move off to the north, but they can kind of dissipate over the Central America region there. That's what it looks like as we head through the next couple of days with this particular system. But if we get a name system out of this, yeah, Monica, you said it earlier, we've already crossed Tammy off the list. We have Vince and Whitney left to go. Certainly the seasonal forecasts earlier this year verified with a lot of the NOAA and CSU coming out with their forecast calling for above average season. It was kind of a divide between meteorologists saying how, well, it could be above average because we have, those really, really warm water temperatures. But we also have El Nino. Well, obviously, the forecasters there at NOAA and CSU knew what they were talking about when they called for this above average season.
Right. Yeah. The water temperatures really did get so warm. So that was great for the hurricanes. But we just showed that wind shear and that'll tear up a storm. Yeah. So they kind of are working against each other. And so, it is interesting, though, that through November and now we're still seeing activity. So it just goes to show that it still can happen. We're still looking at activity there, but can it grow? Nah, the wind shear probably will just tear it apart.
Yeah, so I want to remind everybody that, again, this is an interactive program. If you have any questions, you can use the hashtags under each of our names here and our faces, if you will, our cameras. And we can answer your questions about hurricane season, Rebecca.
That's right. And we actually already have a question. It's directed towards you. So hashtag Hey Amanda, is there going to be a tropical storm in November?
Richard on WFLA Facebook page there. You know, it's always possible. It's what we've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so. Always possible for us to have a tropical system in November. It is still officially hurricane season through the last day of November, but we've also seen storms in December and January as well. We actually had a January storm earlier this year. The National Hurricane Center went back and reanalyzed some of that data. So it didn't get a name at the time, but they did reanalyze the data and decided that it was officially a tropical system. So it does count toward our numbers. Now, this 19 tropical storms there, yeah, it includes one of that one unnamed storm there in January. So possible for us to get a tropical storm in November. You know, with Invest 97L, I don't know that that's going to really be the case. It might become a tropical depression before it moves onshore, but I don't know that we're really going to get a name with that one.
Yeah, I'm hoping it just stays weaker, but with all that warm water and that available energy that it's going to move over to it, it's just hard to look at that map and say, it'll stay weak because of what a big part the sea surface temperatures have played in this year's season.
And you know,
and then they could just, Central America's getting hit with a lot of rain, whether it becomes depression, storm, hurricane. They're still going to be hit with a lot of rain.
And I was just going to say, too, Mexico on guard because of Otis just, what was that, a week ago, a week and a half ago, strengthened. I mean, rapidly is an understatement in this case, became, was supposed to be a tropical storm and then was a Category 5 at landfall, unfortunately, in Acapulco there. So, they're kind of, on guard at this point. Hopefully, everyone's preparing regardless for at least that rain, if not a tropical storm for sure.
I was doing a deep dive with our chief meteorologist, Jeff Baradelli, about Otis because the whole ordeal was almost no forecast models called for that level of intensification. And he found one forecast model that did, but when we looked back at the history of how that particular forecast model does, it's not consistent.
Wow.
There's no way to tell that you could look at that forecast model on any given storm and choose it as the outlier that would win. And it was just such an odd thing for us to miss. I know that intensity forecasting is still one of the more mercurial elements of the hurricane forecasting, but to get that big of a miss, you have to start asking questions. And I also read in an online forum among meteorologists that they don't fly those Eastern Pacific systems. And so we're missing out on data that we would get from Hurricane Hunter aircraft that could have potentially helped the forecast models capture that.
Right. Wow. That's, really interesting because typically the intensity forecast off by 15 miles per hour plus or minus on those maximum wind speeds, but not as much as it was for Otis. So that was very sad situation there because just nobody was prepared for that. So, do we have to worry about that in the future? I mean, it's possible with how warm our water temperatures have been getting.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, if they had flown into the storm, probably better forecasting. It seems like that one model was just a chance almost.
It does seem like that, especially as inconsistent as it looked when we looked at previous model runs. We looked at other storms with that particular model, and it just wasn't enough for you it wasn't a secret sauce for you to say, hey, we should watch this one model for that sort of a thing. I am really worried about those warm waters that this particular invest is going to go over. And we do talk about how sometimes the intensity of the storm does affect how soon it makes its curvature to the north. And so if it does rapidly intensify, could it end up being a problem for Cuba?
Right.
That sort of a thing.
Yeah, and just recurve off to the north a little bit more before then, running into that wind shear that's kind of in the Gulf. That's hopefully protecting us at this point. But it's possible. I mean, you see tons of purples there on your screen. And again, that is the available ocean energy, not just the water temperatures, but it's how warm those water temperatures are and how deep the warm waters go. Because as even just thunderstorms moving over water, it can churn it up a little bit and then it would use up that energy very quickly. But there is tons of energy available because those warm waters go very deep in this particular section of the Caribbean. So that it could get its act together here over the next couple of days. We will be watching it for sure. Right now, though, the National Hurricane Center surprisingly has lowered that chance of development over the past 24 hours. Yesterday, it was at a 70% chance. Now it's at a 50% chance.
Yeah. And then you got, kind of this high pressure system right over us. And so I'm hoping on top of the wind shear plus that high, that ridging, it's going to keep it either weak or off to the south of us.
Yes, yeah, we have a big cold front coming through our area right now. Everybody's excited about the fall weather for the first day of November here and the second day of November, and that's protecting us at this point. Hopefully we'll get another little push and that high pressure keeps us protected and it keeps it south. But always something to watch here. Again, we have 2 names left on the 2023 hurricane list there, Vince and Whitney. And then if we were to, use these 2 up, we would have to go to that alternate names list. We don't use the Greek alphabet anymore. There's a set name list that they go to, and they would just check off those names of the list, the National Hurricane Center we're talking about. But we don't use the Greek alphabet anymore because of a few years ago we got through so many, and they kind of repurposed that.
And so this is the last call for questions. We'd love to answer any questions or even read some comments that you have about this hurricane season, but you do need to use the hashtags, either hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey Amanda, or hashtag Hey Monica, so we can see your comment and pull it on screen.
Yeah, and we would love to know too, we have 4 or 5 episodes left of Tracking the Tropics this season, unless of course there's a more active pattern that starts to develop and we need more episodes. But we would love to know what you guys at home want us to talk about on these last few episodes as well, because again, typically tropics get a little bit quieter heading into November, but if the tropics stay active, we'll talk about the active tropical systems. But if not, we have a few episodes to fill here. So whatever you guys want us to talk about here on these last few episodes, we would love to have your ideas. If it's just questions you want us to kind of ponder over, or questions that you have about this hurricane season in general. So definitely shoot those our way.
Yes, we love to hear your comments and questions. Some of our favorite episodes to do when it's quiet are hurricane hacks. And yes. I didn't know if you had anything to add, Monica, to our hurricane hacks, because we feel like every storm we go through, we learn some new trick or new. My favorite one from last season was putting sod in a kiddie pool in your garage so that your pets could have a place to go to the bathroom during the storm. So that was one of my favorites.
Oh, I love that. I mean, for me, just for a hack as a meteorologist, I'm always watching these storms later in the season, when we're talking October, November, because, behind it comes this cold push of air. And sometimes we'll actually see like a little bit of winter weather. So, not necessarily with these tropical systems, but I'll keep an eye on it. If it starts to get closer to that coastline, I'm thinking, oh man, we've got a push of cold air behind this. Let's be ready for that. So that's a little meteorologist hack that I always keep in the back of my mind.
Yeah, we kind of saw that a little bit last year with Ian. It wasn't necessarily colder weather, but at least the folks recovering down in Fort Myers, there was a lot of drier weather that came in after Ian. That was kind of some relief that came through with that system.
Yeah, I do remember I was on with our radio partners during Ian, and it was right in the height of Ian making impact, and the radio partners were like, hey, your website says it's going to be in the 60s behind this. And I was like, well, I don't know that we're going to make it all the way down to the 60s, but I can tell you I have not looked. Like, that has not been my concentration for the past 48 hours as far as what the forecast looks like 2 days after. But it did draw attention to me. Like, it started to dawn on me that the weather is kind of nice right behind those storms because of that slightly cooler or much cooler air, depending on how far north you are, like Monica. That's good news, for those without power. Sometimes it's not quite as stifling until the power comes back on right behind us.
That's true, yeah. And you being up in Philadelphia there, Monica, you probably get some of these hybrid systems that come in and they're not necessarily tropical, right? But they push off the coast, maybe become subtropical. Either way, your season just kind of continues with these areas of low pressure that move up through the Northeast.
Oh yeah, we love a good coastal low. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have, anything that we can hashtag it as, but it causes all types of problems, coastal flooding and really bad winds and rain. But Yeah, so we get our own this time of the season.
We've had a few meteorologists on this Tracking the Tropics season from the Northeast, and they've talked about how, your season doesn't really ever end, right?
No.
Because it just keeps going into winter, and then you got to track the winter storms.
And then you're tracking nor'easters,
yeah.
which just look so tropical but aren't, and it's fun.
Yes, yeah, it's just rain and snow and wind without a name, all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, for us, hurricane season ends and we're like, oh, it's nice for, 4 or 5 months, even though now we have El Nino, so we have to watch for severe weather here in the Tampa Bay area heading into the spring, but definitely a little bit easier for us to deal with.
Yes. And so
yeah, you guys deal with the toughest parts during hurricane season, but then hurricane season ends for us and then becomes the snow season.
And you can have that all day long. Rebecca and I are not fans.
Nope, we don't do cold.
Nope.
Really? Oh, I love the snow. So take it.
We'll stay down here. You can stay up there. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Oh, well, as we wrap up, I wanted to give the floor to our guest meteorologist, Monica. Any thoughts on this hurricane season? Any thoughts on El Nino? Any thoughts on the weather pattern in general? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, El Nino has been our friend. So thanks to El Nino, this is, tearing some of these storms up. And I think we might be even more active in November if we didn't have El Nino. So yes, it's crazy for some to see, oh my gosh, it's November. I thought hurricane season was over, and we've got a system out there that's going to be bringing rain, wind to Central America. And then there's the possibility, like we were just looking at some of those spaghetti models, pushing it a little bit further northward, and some of those outliers are something we're keeping an eye on. But with El Nino in place, hopefully that can keep it at bay.
Excellent. We do love a good El Nino summer, especially now. The winters get a little tougher for us in the Tampa Bay area with the El Nino, but we need the rain so badly, I don't think we're complaining at all. Right. And this is your reminder that if you see a scary forecast on social media, you can come to verified sources of accurate information, because particularly with this Invest system, a lot of wild posts have been flying around. And so we want to encourage you and remind you to not freak out, but come to possibly Tracking the Tropics and check out what's going on.
Love that so much. We are here always every Wednesday during hurricane season. We are live at 12:30, regardless if there is tropical activity or not. And then if there is tropical activity, we can do extra episodes to track and answer your questions about what is going on. But right now, this is the only thing that we're tracking, and it does look like it is going to stay south of the United States. So we will be back next Wednesday right here at 12:30. You can join us then, or you can always watch past episodes and listen to them through your favorite podcast streaming service or at trackingthetropics.tv. Those are all of our past episodes from this season, so you can certainly go check those out and check out some of those hurricane hacks that we talked about earlier as well. But if not, we will be back here live next Wednesday at 12:30. I want to thank everyone for joining us, especially our featured meteorologist today joining us from WPHL, Monica Cryan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, for Rebecca, Monica, and myself, we'll be back next week.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.